Good morning, Axel.
Good morning, Christian.
It is a great pleasure to have you in my podcast today, Sustainability Leadership Talks.
I'm really excited. Yes, good to be here.
Very much
Thank
looking
you.
forward to our conversation. You're, I think, the second guest that I have when it comes to sustainable finance. So very much looking forward to the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is ESG Simplified, why global standards and industry-specific KPIs drive long-term value. Before we start with the questions, I'm going to introduce you to our audience. Axel, you are a pioneer in sustainable finance and ESG integration. You founded the company SDM and developed the internationally recognized ST KPI standards, which are now aligned with ISSB and SASB. Your work includes creating ESG indices for stocks and Standard & Poor's, and building a database with 16 years of ESG data on 19,000 companies. Your insights have influenced the German regulatory guidance and Germany's sustainability code, driving long-term risk-adjusted outperformance in capital markets. Axel, with all of the political talk that we see currently around sustainability, what is actually happening in the field of ESG standards and reporting?
Yeah, well, so one of my topics is less can be more, and I think that's currently happening in the political sphere as well. So, I mean, we saw in Europe the CSRD, ESRS reporting requirements, but they were, from my perspective, totally overdone. And
Mm-hmm.
now they are in omnibus, so which means they will be reduced. So nobody knows finally how far they will be reduced, but they will be reduced to to less than before, and I think this is somehow aligned with the international global standards ISSB, SASB, which do focus much more. So I think it goes in the right direction. Of course, if
Okay.
you look in the United States, with Trump, it's well, maybe too far reduced.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
sometimes you have the feeling that there is no ESG anymore, which is of course not true. Um, but so I think, yeah, it's always the best to find compromises in the middle. And so that's why I say less can be more, less than ESRS before. But more, definitely more than nothing, because ESG is a very important topic and will always be there, because just it's the global challenges which are there and which are getting more and more important every day. And so I think that's my answer to your introductory question.
Excellent. That also fits into what I hear from companies and sustainability heads of organizations that I'm talking to also in the US. So what you just mentioned, I get reflected in these conversations as well. There is much more going on than we actually hear about. That term greenwashing has been used quite often over the last month in conversations. So a lot of people have realized that it makes sense to really take the topic serious and to view take a view on it from a strategic company point of view and not from an ideological point of view, and then it makes a lot of sense.
True,
When
true.
we
So
take a look,
I actually studied,
Mhm.
sorry for interrupting, but I studied market-oriented environmental management. So today you would say market-oriented sustainability management. So, but you have to have the market in mind. So finally, the corporations have to act on it, and the investors have to have something which they could really use for their investments as a additional source of information. And so I think both could not do well too much regarding thousands of indicators. So a focus is needed. And
Okay. When we take a look at the global ESG standards, Axel,
Mhm.
how do you see international ESG standards like ISSB, SASB, and SDI, SDKPI shaping the future of corporate sustainability reporting?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, talking about the history a little bit, so first, the STKPI standard was published in 2010, and
Mhm.
it was the first global standard for financial material ESG KPIs in 68 industries. So we surveyed investors and analysts globally in the main capital markets. So, what are the three most important ESG KPIs per industry?
Mhm.
Um, then in 2016, we had a collaboration with the American standard setter, so the Sustainable Accounting Standard Board, SASB, and this is now part of ISSB,
Mhm.
so the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is IFRS, let's say, daughter. And so I think IFRS, ISSB will prevail globally as the global standard for ESG KPIs, and so they have a high degree of overlap with the SD KPIs. The thing is that ISSB is now in its first reporting year, so the companies first should report about 2025 regarding ISSB, and ISSB wants SASB as a guidance for its industry specific topics. And so as DKPIs have a high degree of overlap, but as we do already have published in 2010, we have a, well, of course, longer history and also the data, which we will speak about later on. We also have a history for that. But so um, I think that these global standards will really prevail because we have global capital markets which need global standards for global portfolios, and this is not doable with let's say European standards or Asian standards. So we need something global, and ISSB names itself a global baseline. So of course,
Mhm.
on to this global baseline, you can put something extra, something regional, for example. But to have a common global baseline is definitely necessary for the companies and for the investors.
Yeah. We're going to come to that point as well, but as mentioned before, when I speak to people being responsible in bigger organizations for sustainability, then also here it's such a complex topic when you need to comply with all of the different regulations in the different markets that you're acting with. Is of course a lot of additional workload that companies need to do. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to take a look at global standards in this context. In our conversation that we had before our recording today, we also spoke about industry-specific relevance. So my next question is, why is it critical for ESG standards to be industry-specific, and what challenges do companies face in implementing them effectively?
Yeah. So the main important target group for ESG reporting from the companies are investors and analysts. Um, and and they have in their law to achieve a risk-adjusted good performance. So if they integrate ESG, they should do it in a manner which improves the risk-adjusted financial performance in the long term. And the thing is, if you do not do ESG integration industry specific, you will lose a lot of this risk-adjusted performance because every industry is different. So if you look at conventional analysis of companies, it's also industry specific. Every investment bank has industry specific teams to look at different peers but industry per industry. So if you integrate ESG, you should also do it in this industry specific manner. To make a good example, maybe. So everybody's talking about climate change. But remember COVID crisis. So and think of the pharmaceutical industry. So in those days, the most important topics for pharmaceutical industry was to create um, to create something which helps to get rid of this virus, right? And
Mhm.
so R&D performance was the most important one, and then that you do not have any bad influence of this medicine on the patients. So this was maybe one of the three indicators, and finally, after having the vaccination, then the topic was how can we distribute it globally for achievable for a low price, let's say. So these are more or less three social indicators, and you might remember that the first medicine we got, you had to cool down with minus 80 degrees Celsius, and this was somehow a climate killer. But of course, nobody cared, and also the financial analysts did not care about this. So it could be something, just as an example, that you see, if you do it industry specific, you achieve more financial performance and also better, ESG performance in
Mhm.
general.
Okay, good. You mentioned quite at the beginning of our conversation today, less is more. So
Mhm.
when we take a look at simplicity versus complexity, the principle of less is more suggests 3 to 9 standardized material ESG KPIs per industry. How can organizations ensure these few KPIs capture what truly matters for them?
Yeah. Um, Again, as investors and analysts are the most important target group, they want to have a focused set of
Mhm.
KPIs, and KPI means key performance indicator, not just indicator. And so key means, up to 10 indicators, and not more, because finally you have to integrate this into your investment decision. And if you have too many indicators, then you might have a good feeling, oh, I thought about everything, but finally you have to weight these indicators in your decision as a investor. And if you have too many KPIs, or just indicators, you are lowering down the weight of the really important ones. So this is important to keep this in mind, that investors very often do not use more than 10 indicators in their risk management, because otherwise it just gets too complicated, and the result will not be financial material enough anymore. And I mean, for the organizations, I mean, the companies, it's just the other way around, because I mean, they want the investors to look at their company and at their performance, so they should do something which reflects the attitudes of the investors and what they want to hear from them.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, they should also have maybe the same a KPI set, which the investors want to hear.
Yeah, totally understandable. So you also mentioned, or we mentioned at the beginning in the introduction, that your company has accumulated historical data over the last 16 years, which are available through the SDKP Inform database. How can companies leverage this to benchmark and improve their ESG performance?
Yeah, I think it's always good in management to know what the peers are doing, and therefore, yeah, it's really interesting to see when companies use our database and get a license for it. They can see their peers. So we have some 19,000 companies. We have 42 peer groups. This means you have some 500 to 600 peers per peer group. So this gives you a really global view. What are all the other peers doing, and where do they perform better, and where do they perform worse? Um, You can also see charts for the top companies, for the bottom companies, and these are long-term charts. And today, many talk about transition passes. We say, okay, these passes started in the past, so you can see them in our charts, where all these peers come from and how they developed in the past, and this might give you already a good idea how the future will look for the peers as well, and that's very helpful for good management, I guess.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Axel, you often speak about financially material ESG KPIs. What does this mean in practice, and how does this concept influence investor decision making?
Yeah, it's as I said, in the investors law, you have to look at the risk adjusted performance effects in the long term. And as I explained, it's industry specific, these KPIs, and so you have to focus on the industry, but you also have to focus on just a few key performance indicators, which then in the long term really contribute to this financial outperformance effects. And then you really have a match between your ESG investing practices and the law you have to follow, because otherwise you risk, if you have integrated too many ESG indicators which are not material, you might lose risk adjusted performance in the long term, and this would bring you in conflict to your investment law, and you might be sued by your beneficiaries and so on, and this is what nobody really wants. So you really have to focus on this financial material ESG KPIs.
Could you give a few examples that you have heard of companies using that are relevant?
Yeah, well, I've already mentioned this pharmaceutical industry thing, for example. Of course, there is no climate change indicator. Of course, in many other industry, climate change is quite a big topic. So we really often um, look at the carbon intensity, which means CO2 emissions per turnover. Well, this is something which you can really compare over time, which you can also compare with the peers, and which already have some financial impact included, because the turnover is, of course, a financial impact, yeah, and CO2 emission is something from the environmental space. So you already have in this one indicator, you already have the combination of environment and financial performance. So that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is
If you
another.
have a few more examples, go ahead. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I would just suggest to the audience to have a look at an SDKPI standard, because there are all these 68 industries, and well, every person who is listening here is acting in a different industry and might be in especially interested in the KPIs of his or her industry. So I really would say, please go to an SD KPI standard, download it on the SDM website, and then you find for the 68 industries always the three most important ESG KPIs, and this gives you a very easy start also for SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises, to start with ESG management, because we learned that they looked at the ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, but found it so complex that they did not want to start at all, and on that, this is also where the KPI standards are made for, to make things easier, also for SMEs. So please just download it and have a look at the particular industries and KPIs right there.
Okay, very good. That's surely helpful if people can have then a link, and I can put a link into the description of the podcast so that then it's easier for the
Mhm.
audience to find
Yeah,
it.
sure.
I heard of a couple of organizations that I spoke to that have been going down to product carbon footprint calculations and having derived interesting findings through this. So changing probably the setup of the products, the manufacturing process of the products, or also changing components, whatever, which also seems to be a quite interesting KPI for manufacturing companies. What do you think about this?
Definitely. I mean, the problem with carbon measuring is still scope 3,
Mhm.
because it's kind of very complex. You have to know everything about your supply chain. You have to know everything about your clients using your product, and maybe even how the product might be recycled after usage. So there are lots of estimations out there and not too much data. So you might have a good feeling to look at scope 3, but finally there's so many evaluations and estimations in this that it's might also, let's say, disguide you. So we are pretty often focusing on scope 1 and 2 because this is a little bit more reliable, because investors also want reliable information, and not so much guesses about the future, let's say. Yeah. But it's definitely still a new topic. I mean, I wrote my first publication about climate, how climate indicators are changing management reporting some 22 years ago, but it's still a young industry, let's say. It will be getting more and more advanced in the years to come. So so I could just say, please, companies, have a look at it and start early, because it's not easy. But you have to start because it's important for your future.
Absolutely. And then it's could be a competitive edge or disadvantage if you're doing it now or not yet. So when we shift the view to portfolio integration,
Mhm.
how have ESG KPIs been successfully integrated into mainstream equity, corporate bond, and credit portfolios? And what lessons can we learn from these cases?
Yeah. So when we started with this KPI development, it was actually European law, which brought us to this start, because European law wanted companies since 2003, so some 22 years now, to integrate financial material ESG KPIs, but only if they are relevant for the particular business. And so the question for us was, so what's really relevant?
Mhm.
And so this was a starting point of the SD KPI standard setting. And finally, after setting the standards and creating the database, we really wanted to know, so is this now financial material or is it not? And that's why we thought, how can we prove this to the audience? And
Mhm.
I thought the only thing is you have to be better than conventional indices. And so we started with stocks. So Euro Stocks 50, for example, but also Stocks Europe 600 index. So the 600 largest European companies, we integrated SD KPIs there. How did we do this? We did not exclude from the Stocks Europe 600. So all 600 companies are still in the index, but they are evaluated according to SD KPIs. And if they are very bad in SD KPIs, they are underweighted. So for example, if a index component had, let's say, 1% of weight in the index and has very bad ESG indicators, they were underweighted by 50%. So from 1% to half of a percent.
Mhm.
And if they are very good, they are overweighted. And if they are, well, let's say in the middle, the weighting will be neutral. So, and if you do this for the whole portfolio, in the long term, you saw, for example, for Stocks Europe 600 for 5 years, you had 1.3% of more financial performance. If you did the same for the Standard & Poor's 500 index from the United States, the leading index there, you saw for the last 10 years, you had 0.7% of more performance per year against the S&P 500 index. And finally, we talked to large investors in Germany. So these are insurance companies. And they told us, well, it's nice to outperform equity indices like Stocks Europe 600 and S&P 500, but we are just investing in equity for 3 or 4% of our portfolio, and we have 50 to 70% of bonds, and so fixed income investments. And that's why they said, please also create a corporate bond index. And so we used the leading one, which is iBox, which is now part of S&P too. And there are the iBox corporate indices in for example, in euro. And if you also do the same over underweighting of the corporate bonds in such an index, you ended up with a long-term outperformance of 4 to 5 basis points per year, which is 0.05% per year, which is of course not a huge outperformance, but you have to keep in mind that it's fixed income, so you do not return that much as in the equity space. But on the other hand, the investor said, well, even if you have just 1 basis point of outperformance, this gives us, as we invested so much in this asset class of corporate bonds, it still gives us some good outperformance. And we can also say, okay, we integrated ESG according to a standard and add up with outperformance, so we do not lose money from this. We even gain money for our beneficiaries.
Extremely interesting, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So continue on this. We spoke about studies before, and studies show risk-adjusted outperformance when ESG KPIs are integrated into portfolios. What do you think? What are these factors that drive this long-term success?
Yeah, so we surveyed the leading investors in Europe, which are the pension funds, not so much from Germany, but from UK or Sweden or Switzerland or Netherlands. So there are the big pension funds. And so they told us, or we asked them, so what kind of ESG research do you think will lead to risk-adjusted outperformance in the long term? And they said, if we look at 100 or 200 ESG indicators, they thought this is a lot of costs for them, lots of efforts, but finally they will underperform the market because, as I explained earlier, they include the most material ESG KPIs in a set of 100 or 200 indicators, but finally they are watered down. The weighting of the most important KPIs is watered down. And that's why they thought if you really focus on just 3 SD KPIs and integrate this in your mainstream research and your mainstream investment processes, this will lead to risk-adjusted outperformance in the long term. And so, and finally, it really came true. What they told us already some 15 years ago. They are really long-term investors, and so they have a good feeling about these long-term factors and what influence and what does not influence out performance.
Extremely interesting, and that makes then a lot of sense that boards take a closer look at this. What role should boards then play in ensuring ESG KPIs are not just compliance metrics, but strategic drivers of value creation?
Yeah, so many boards had this compliant topics with CSRD, ESRS, but they really just put it away from the board decisions and put it to the compliance department, let's say, or just reporting department, and then it's not part of the strategic decision of the company anymore. So what I learned when I studied business administration was the balance scorecard concept, which says you have to put all your most important KPIs on a scorecard, which includes some 10 KPIs for the whole company.
Mhm.
And this was even before ESG. So it's just a question of complexity. A board has to focus on the most material KPIs. So, and they said, okay, it's about 10. And so if you want to integrate there also ESG challenges into this balanced scorecard, you could maybe add 2 or 3 more KPIs. So let's say SD KPIs, and you would have not 10, but 13 KPIs, which is still manageable.
Mhm.
But you should not put another 10 or maybe even 100 indicators, because this is just not manageable for a board. So please just keep this in mind. Keep it simple, and so do not add too many further ESG KPIs in your balanced scorecard.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. When we now, as a final question, take the view and the difference between a global baseline and local nuances, how can companies, in your view, balance the need for a global ESG baseline with local regulatory and cultural differences?
Yeah, well, first of all, try to look at the global baseline ISSB SASB, which will prevail, as I said before. So start there, and then you might see there might be a few regional special situations where you want to add an additional indicator, which is not defined in these global standards. So this is doable because it's just a global baseline where you can add something on. Yeah. But finally, I think if the local or if the local regulation would be totally different from the global standard, this won't have any future. So one thing is, I talked to a lawyer about this. So the financial definition of what is the legal definition of what is financial material.
Mhm.
This definition in ISSB and this definition in the European CSRD, it's more or less the same, because it says you have to look at something which really is important for the most important target group, which are investors and analysts. So this kind of definition of financial materiality is the same in the global and in the European level. So there is if you keep this in mind, in the European CSRD, you have to look at or you have to prepare materiality analysis.
Mhm.
So from this 1,000 indicators I talked about, you should make a materiality analysis and define which of these indicators are really material for my company. And if you say, okay, if the definition of financial materiality in CSRD and ISSB is the same, why not use the ISSB as the result of materiality analysis
Mhm.
for your European CSRD, which would be the best alignment of these two standards, let's say. Yeah,
Mhm.
they look very, very different, but in the result, it could be just the same. And this would be very good for your target group of investors and analysts, because they all invest globally, and so they want something global. But as I said, a few regional special situations will always be there. Also, cultural differences. So, but that is something which you can add on. But the global thing, the global baseline, is the most important one, I guess.
Okay, excellent. With the things that you've seen over the past years and what we currently see in the regulatory space, when you look ahead, what innovations or shifts do you anticipate in ESG measurement and reporting over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So I really believe that ISSB will be more and more and more important, because they have just 2025 is just about to finish this year. So in 2026, we will see the first companies reporting about ISSB, and in the years to come, more and more regulatory definitions will in different countries will also be aligned with ISSB, or will just copy paste ISSB. I think also in Europe, ISSB will get a better start. So this will be more and more important each year. And so the thing is, for companies and also for investors, when should we start? Not if, but just when should we start with ISSB integration? So when I talk to risk managers of banks, of asset managers or insurance companies, the risk managers are risk adverse. I mean, that's their job. so they have a they want to see what they get before they really integrate it in their risk management. So you can say, if ISSB is just producing the first data in 2026, the risk managers want to wait another 5 to 10 years to integrate it, because you first have to have this kind of history. But I say then you will lose lots of financial performance, but because you should act earlier. And that's what this is where we advise, why not use the SD KPI database with this high degree of overlap to ISSB and SASB and the 16 years of history to really start backtesting today what would be the impact on your portfolios, what would have been the impact on your portfolios in the last 5 to 10 years. So then you can even start right now integrating it if you see the same positive financial, material, long-term outperformance effects as we saw them in the equity and corporate bond indices. If you can see the same effects on your portfolios already in the past, why wait? Why wait another 5 to 10 years? I think you just lose performance, and of course also you lose ESG impact.
Wonderful, Axel. Thanks a lot for this very insightful discussion and this call to action at the end. So it makes a lot of sense to start right now, especially if you have not yet started before. Go deeper and see that it makes a lot of sense. So thanks again, Axel. It was great speaking to you.
Thank you, Christian. Likewise. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Most welcome. Bye-bye, Axel.
Thank you. Bye.